Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Figuristic Productions, and today I'll be looking at my own custom Mcfarlane Arkham Origins Deathstroke. But with that said, let's get right into it. Starting off with articulation, Deathstroke has 360-degree head rotation. However, this is slightly hindered by the bandana or ninja straps on the back of his head, and also the neck piece that's sculpted onto the figure as well. He's able to look about this high up, give or take, as he kind of had to get the head underneath the armor, as you can see here. So he's able to look about that high up, this far down, and he's able to tilt his head from side to side. Moving on to his shoulders, Deathstroke's arms have 360-degree rotation and are slightly different in articulation sometimes because of the sculpting on his shoulders. But his shoulders are able to go up about this high on each arm. Each arm also has bicep swivel, and he has double jointed elbows. However, because of the way that this was developed, sometimes only one of his joint will move, so sometimes you have to kind of grab it and force the other one to go a little bit too, as well. But when you get it to work, it's about this. And it actually looks really good and fairly decent for a double joint elbow. Works pretty well. But moving on to his hands, Deathstroke has ball wrists that allow for vertical movement, as well as horizontal movement. But moving on to his torso, Deathstroke's on this, I guess you could say, like a hinge joint, where it kind of only goes in certain areas. As you can see here, there's no separation on his, I guess, his chest piece, so that way the sculpt stays in all one piece. And while it does look pretty good, it kind of hinders his movement somewhat in some areas, while in other areas it kind of helps actually. As you can see here, Deathstroke's able to go this far back, which is a fair distance, but not that much forward. He has 360-degree rotation, but he is able to go side to side very well. But moving on to his waist and midsection, Deathstroke's legs are able to kick about this far out. His left leg is able to kick about this high up. He's able to kick about this far back, while his right leg is only able to go up about this high, mainly due to the sculpted holster, and it's able to kick about this far back. I will also note that as part of the articulation, Deathstroke kind of has, I guess you could say, sculpted muscles or sculpted buttocks here, and it kind of messes with this back piece here, which is on the more rubbery side, while this is more of a harder plastic. So as you can see here, it kind of does that, and it rubs on it a little bit, and it kind of hinders articulation a little bit. Not entirely, but it makes articulation way less smooth than it should be. But moving on to his knees, Deathstroke has double jointed knees, which sadly only go about 90 degrees. You can see that right here, while this one did move up here, as you can see here, this is when it's in its normal stage, and when it's tilted, it does go back more. But I think it's because of either the internal sculpting or the sculpting of the buckle here that's preventing Deathstroke from going all the way. But that's kind of disappointing on this figure, I'd say, because especially as an assassin, Deathstroke's only able to move his legs this much. I think it's kind of disappointing personally. But moving on to his feet, Deathstroke's feet are on ankle hinges that allow for his feet to go this far down, this far up. This is kind of hindered due to the leg piece or the shin armor that's crafted onto his leg guards, and he also has toe articulation as well. His feet are also able to pivot and also change direction due to the ball wrists or ball ankles that Mcfarlane has used for this figure. Another thing I want to note is that sometimes it can be hard for Deathstroke to stand. Like you can see here, he can't really stand without me letting him go. But if you kind of bend his knees a little bit and kind of angle his feet, sometimes he is able to stand pretty decently. It also doesn't help that it's kind of weird the way Mcfarlane sort of designed Deathstroke, as sometimes he's kind of like in this position where he looks like he's walking, or at least like he's puffing his chest out, and he looks like he's kind of standing at an angle somewhat. At this angle, it's not that bad, but at different angles, it does look very, very odd. Kind of like he's giving like a very animated stance. But I'd say overall that the stance overall on Deathstroke is fairly decent, but I do think that it could use a lot of work just so that way he could stand much better. Starting off with accessories, Deathstroke came with a standard Mcfarlane DC Multiverse stand and also his own trading card, based on his design from Batman Arkham Origins, which I'd like to say that this design is mostly faithful to, with some changes in between. But here's the front cover art, and here is the back description. Pause now if you want to read the description. Continuing with accessories, Deathstroke came with his own sword and also a sheath or scabbard for his sword. However, in a really weird move, Mcfarlane designed this sheath or scabbard to be, I guess, I don't know if it's supposed to be see-through or if it's just supposed to be meant like that so you could see it, but it's a really weird design, as with the sword in the sheath, it actually would look fine if it was covered. Like right here, it looks pretty good. I think it actually looks really great like this. But on this side, it looks really weird. And it doesn't help with the fact that the sword itself is kind of flimsy. So it's able to warp fairly easily, especially if the scabbard itself is also warped. As you can see here, it kind of bends instead of just going straight. So I would have preferred if Mcfarlane used the hard plastic for this. Here's a quick look at Deathstroke with the sword on his back. And while I would say that it's not super noticeable, it still doesn't look as good as it should. I wish the sheath was covered so that way it would just look more normal, especially for Deathstroke, who's supposed to be an assassin. And overall, I don't understand Mcfarlane's choice to at least show that part of the sword there when the whole point of a sheath is that it's not supposed to be shown, it's supposed to be covered. Continuing with accessories, I'd just like to note that these are actually my own accessories that I've given my custom Deathstroke just to add a little bit more flair and more accessories to him. But starting off up here, you can see that this right here, you might be wondering what this is. This is meant to be Deathstroke's staff, and I haven't painted it yet, but I eventually do plan on painting this. And this is just a cake pop stick that I got, and that was being unused at the time. So I just used it for Deathstroke, and I'll show it off later, but it's actually a fairly decent, although kind of small size for Deathstroke to use as a staff. Continuing on here, this is, I believe this is called the remote back claw. I could be wrong. If you know in the comments down below, please correct me, as I've never played Arkham Origins. I've seen plenty of gameplay and I have played all the other Arkham games, but I've only seen this in Arkham Origins. But one thing I will say is that while this, I actually do think that this design is alright for the most part. The weird part is that this figure actually came with the Mcfarlane Arkham Asylum Batman, which is odd because Deathstroke and Batman both use this weapon. Specifically, Batman got this weapon from Deathstroke, or the gadget at least. And it's in Arkham Origins, not Arkham Asylum. So it's really odd to see that Mcfarlane gave this gun from Arkham Origins to Arkham Asylum Batman. Because at first I thought this was just a grapple gun, but then I went back to look in game and it's not the grapple gun. This is something else entirely, which is the remote back claw. So I think it's a really odd choice that Mcfarlane didn't just give this to Deathstroke, or just not include it, because it doesn't match Arkham Asylum Batman, and it matches more for Deathstroke, especially since Deathstroke as a normal figure only came with his sword and the stand and the trading card as his accessories, which I find to be really odd. But moving on, this gun here is actually from the Thomas Wayne Flashpoint Batman. And this weapon, I actually give to Deathstroke because I just think it looks really good on him. Especially because Deathstroke, as I'll show later, actually has a sculpted gun holster with the gun in it. So it's not removable and it's just stuck there. And also, one of his hands is more of a trigger hand. So this gun looks really good on him. And also, I do like that this gun is just, it's kind of like a Desert Eagle design, whilst kind of merging the line in between just like a normal everyday handgun, but it does mostly resemble a Desert Eagle. But moving on to his rifle. This rifle is from the Mcfarlane Fortnite Vendetta figure. And I believe that while Deathstroke, I don't believe Deathstroke used a rifle specifically in Arkham Origins. I have seen him use a lot of guns that look like this in media, specifically the Mezco Deathstroke that has a AR that looks very similar to this. And as you can also see for, I believe it's the Mixmax Toys Stab of Hades, quote-unquote, not Deathstroke figure. He also comes with a gun that's very similar to this. And while I don't own any guns that are similar to this in toy form, I actually think that this gun is a fairly decent substitute for it, as it kind of gets the overall shape. And while I didn't paint anything on this, I do think this gun also looks really good on him. I like the blue tape over this here. I kind of like the silver areas that distinguish more of the gun. And the part I like the most is the scratches here, kind of signifying the amount of kills that whoever is wielding this weapon has gotten with it. And I think it looks really good and fits Deathstroke a lot as well. For a quick showcase, here's Deathstroke holding the pistol and also my makeshift staff for him. Here's Deathstroke holding his AR and also having his sword on his back. And while it is a little small, especially the stock, I will say that I still think this weapon looks pretty good on Deathstroke. And lastly, here's Deathstroke holding the remote controlled Batclaw. And yes, if you're wondering, this is the way that Deathstroke and also Batman use it in the game as well. Compared to when Batman's using it, where he uses two hands, he grips the back piece here and also the front piece here. But in the game and also the boss battle, from what I've seen, Deathstroke actually uses the remote back claw similar to this or almost exactly like this, because as he's fighting Batman, sometimes he'll try to grapple like gas canisters onto Batman, and he'll use this back piece here in order to trigger it. And now that I actually look at it, something I didn't notice before is that there's actually a little button piece there that kind of signifies the fact that that's what you're supposed to press in order to launch the back claws to the target that you're selecting. And I'm assuming that this is just for stability here, this grip piece, just so that way in case someone's using it with two hands, they could use it just for more accuracy in case they're stationary or they have to do like a very quick shoot of the remote backclaw. And another thing to note is that Deathstroke can actually store some of his weapons, specifically from what I've only seen, the remote backclaw here on his back as well. This is the back piece that's meant for his sword and the sheath, but I found out that the handle here is actually small enough to just fit inside of there, so that way you can actually stick it on his back, kind of like he has it in reserve. That was a view from the back, but here's a view from the front. And also you could even see that this gun, like I said, I think really looks good for Deathstroke, especially when he's holding it in this position. It looks really good, especially showing off the amount of kills that he has on his gun as well. But with that said, let's move on to the sculpt, which is the part that I wanted to talk about most for this video. For my custom of Deathstroke, I mainly just did a black wash on this figure. If you have any black paint, just dilute it with some water, mix it around a bit until it's nice and watery, and I just basically put it on the figure. However, in my case, I actually used black shoe polish, as many people recommend it, as it's really good for getting into a lot of tighter areas, and also it does come liquidy already, so it is a lot easier to just put on your figure as well. As you can see here, I added it almost everywhere on the figure, as originally this figure was kind of like a plasticky blue, so it was kind of weird to see as not much of the detail was shown. But I'd say that with this black wash, it looks a lot better, as you can really see like the, I guess, carbon steel or like the little rivets and areas that Deathstroke has on his armor as well. And another thing that this really helps with is the damage on specifically on his armor, as you might not notice at first when you originally had the figure, but as you can see here, I actually painted a lot of areas where Deathstroke had damage onto his armor. As you can see here, there's some bullet holes or dents in here that I painted silver just so that way it stood out more as well. But specifically going back to the black wash though, it just helped me see where the divots were and where all the like in between areas. As you can see here, there's this mark right here that's like a slash mark. And honestly, before, I didn't even notice it on Deathstroke. There was a lot of things I didn't notice. But upon putting all this black wash on here, it actually really helped show off all the areas here. Like you can see here that he has different segments in between his helmet with the side piece here and kind of like the forehead piece. And even the back piece here with like the straps and stuff on the head, which I didn't paint. But my point is that the black wash actually really helped it. It really emphasized the amount of detail, and it helped differentiate different areas too as well. As you can see here, this area right here is more of a very dark blue, but this is a black here. So it also helps to kind of blend while at the same time creating a slight contrast in between. So that way you could see the differences while also seeing that still the same part of the armor as well. Oh, and for anyone wondering, I did cover up Deathstroke's eye, just so that way when I was blackwashing the figure, it didn't get everywhere in his eye, especially, as if it did get in his eye, I think it would have colored the entire skin tone black, and it would have made it kind of hard to see his face. But moving on, I did also a lot of silver dry brushing or just silver like painting onto many areas of Deathstroke. As you can see here on his armor, on the rivets here, the dents anyways, and also the armor pieces here, I painted some silver so that way there's more of an emphasis on the armor and the damage, and also makes it stick out a lot more as well. You can also see that I silver dry brushed the packaging here, or at least his pockets, just so that way it would stand out more, because there are buckles and little details in between that are kind of lost, because originally this came as just a matte and complete black. so you couldn't really see the differences in between. I also did this for their hand grenade as well, or frag grenade as well, as I just painted a little bit of silver on it, just so that way it had some more detail. I didn't really do anything with the, I guess you could say, the copper or the bronze on Deathstroke, as I just blackwashed it. So mostly it's just a darker and muddier looking copper compared to like a brighter copper in between. Another thing I want to talk about is the fact that Deathstroke has a holstered gun. I absolutely hate this on figures. I hate the fact that it's put in a holster and it's just there. It's not movable. I mean, technically you could cut it off, but I never got to doing that. And it's just really annoying, especially for a guy like Deathstroke. That's kind of giving us a Batman, but he has his grapple gun strapped to his back. And it's not removable. It's just kind of glued in. And it's just something that it's just kind of a pet peeve for me, because I like it when you can take out the weapon. It makes it look more interesting, adds more playability to it, and overall I think it's just way cooler. So that's why I included one of the Thomas Wayne guns as one of Deathstroke's custom accessories that I added, because, you know, it's just annoying to have that gun there and you're not able to take it out. Another thing I did is that I actually plan on going back and painting the straps here for Deathstroke as well. As you can see here, he has a lot of straps, but it's either all black or all blue. As you can see here on his legs, there's actually no color distinction. It's just all blue plastic. So you kind of miss the fact that he has straps here with buckles, compared to these up here where they're actually painted black. And I did a little bit of dry brushing on them, just so that way you could also see them too, to make his buckles stand out more as well. I didn't really do much on Deathstroke's feet, but I did do some slight silver dry brushing on the sides of the feet as well. But the most distinct area, I'd say, is Deathstroke's arms. Specifically on this arm here, I painted the shotgun shells red on the bottom and also silver on the top as well. I also painted the ones on the side there also red. And another thing I'd like to discuss is the difference between this figure and also the source material as well. Or anyways, at least the trading card. As you can see here on the trading card, Deathstroke's shotgun shells actually have like a gold top to it and it's red on the bottom. However, I just took it upon myself just to make it silver because I prefer it to look more silver than gold. But perhaps maybe I'll go back and change it one day. But you can also see that there's a lot of things that Mcfarlane also took some liberties with. I believe that this figure might be based off more of concept art than the actual in-game model. As you can see that his torso piece, or at least his stomach piece, is actually slightly different. As here, it's kind of like a raised, almost like plated armor, while in here, it's, at least the trading card, it's more of just like the armor paneling that's just there as one like whole piece that's just segmented. While this one looks like it has more layers to it and it's laying upon like other armor. Another thing I'd like to point out too is that one thing I actually like better is that in the trading card here, Deathstroke's on the right side of his face where it's covered, it's actually more of like a smooth, almost ceramic, very like rounded metal, compared to here where it's more of like a carbon steel. So it kind of has like that grainy look to it and also has more segments into it as well. And also even has this damage mark here that I colored in silver just to make it more abundant that he took some damage onto the side of his mask, compared to this one where it looks mostly clean. Another thing I'd like to note too is that this Deathstroke, while this one is not completely accurate, I do really like this design as well. And although it could always be more accurate, I do think that this figure is different enough to where it's not really super annoying. I find that sometimes figures don't really go accurate to the source material, or they're not really accurate to the image that's provided for the figure. But this one overall is fairly accurate for the most part, even though it's not completely accurate with some of the sculpt. But the one thing I will say is that it is definitely not accurate to the paint scheme. And I'm not just talking about my custom. My custom, it is fairly inaccurate, but to be fair, it is my own custom. However, the figure that came here was way off. The dark blue that you see on his main armor wasn't even here before. It was actually, like I said before, it was like a very teal blue, and it was very odd. Now that I think about it, it almost looked like the sky back here, like this area of the sky was kind of like a very bright blue, and it was really odd. But to be fair, I will say that Mcfarlane probably was experimenting at the time, so didn't really have time to either mess with the paint that much, or even just stay accurate to the material, I guess. But I will say, now saying it out loud, it's not really an excuse, because I still think that in general this figure should have came painted, detailed, and fairly accurate to the source material. But I will say that customizing this, even though it was actually one of my first customs I've ever made, it was actually really fun to work on. I actually really liked coloring in the little silver bits, looking and discovering new parts of the armor, and even just blackwashing it as well. As I looked up some YouTube videos and I tried it out for the first time, and it was a really risky take, but I'm glad that I went through with it because it looks really good. As I've said multiple times before, the armor looks a lot darker, it looks a lot more militaristic, and I also even added blackwash onto the silver chainmail as well. And it makes the chainmail look even better, as you can see the individual scales, and you can even see where some areas are darker than others, just to add that little bit more realism or distinction between it. Because before, some of the areas were completely just silver, so there was no distinction. In addition, I'm pretty sure most people noticed, but I think between the buckle here and on the top torso piece, Deathstroke had scales there, but it was not painted silver at all. So that is one part that Mcfarlane also missed as well. And especially, I gotta say that painting the shotgun shells was one of my favorite parts of painting this figure, as I was able to just add my own distinction to it a little bit with using kind of like a darker, but also like a bright red. Not too bright to the point where it stands out a lot, but distinct enough so that way you could see it on the armor as well. But one thing I will say is that I'm not sure how I feel about the arm design for this, as I'll bring back the trading card. On here, the shotgun shells are fairly small, and Deathstroke has a continuing arm piece here, almost looking like, if you know what I'm talking about, the Halo Reach security arm armor, where it kind of like bulges up. As you can see here on the side, it actually has a top piece, and also the shotgun shells are fairly small and go back a little bit more. Compared to this, however, Mcfarlane chose to make the shotgun shells a lot bigger, and it looks like it takes up the entire shoulder piece. And Deathstroke is also missing this area right here that looks like it was supposed to be a cover for his shotgun shells or a cover for his armor. So it does leave a weird indent where it looks like Deathstroke's just missing armor. But I will say that overall, it's just kind of a nitpick. But I will say, continuing on with this sort of tangent rant, that I do wish that Deathstroke was a little bit more accurate to the source material, especially the trading card image, as it would have looked really great in figure form. Before I get into size comparisons, I'd just like to thank anyone that's watching this video all the way up to this point. This video is significantly longer than my other videos, and I'd just like to thank you for viewing it. But anyways, here's Deathstroke next to the 3 Jokers, Mcfarlane Batman, and also my own custom Mcfarlane Red Hood. For a villains comparison, here's Deathstroke next to the Mcfarlane Rebirth Bizarro and also the Mcfarlane 3 Jokers Clown. For a 6-inch comparison, here's Deathstroke next to the Marvel Legends Retro Carded Spider-Man and also the Marvel Legends Vulcan. For a militaristic comparison, here's Deathstroke next to the Marvel Legends Demolition Man and also the G.I. Joe Classified Series Snake Eyes. For another militaristic comparison, here's Deathstroke next to the Valaverse Bone Collector and Carrick. And for a final comparison, here's my custom Deathstroke next to my custom Mcfarlane Grim Knight. Overall, I'd say that the Mcfarlane Arkham Origins Deathstroke is a somewhat adequate figure. I like that he came with his main accessory of the sword, the sculpting is very nice, and I also really like the design. However, the, I guess, design of some of the accessories, specifically the sheath and the scabbard, and also the lack of paint on this figure does bring it down a couple points, especially the articulation as well, as it's also lacking in certain areas, kind of balancing this figure out for me to be more of like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 without the paint. However, in customizing this figure, I'd say that I actually really had fun with this figure. I think this figure is one of the first figures that I ever customized, and it's kind of what sparked me into doing this and also customizing my own figures. But I would say that overall, this figure is an adequate pickup. If you have the availability to pick him up, I'd say go for it if you're feeling it. If not, that's fine too. But with that said, if you've made it this far into the video, please consider liking, subscribing, or even just leaving a comment down below. Or if you don't feel like it, just watching is enough. Thank you. I've been Figuristic Productions, and I'll see y'all in the next one. And because I almost forgot, I'd like to say that eventually I do want to go back and revise this figure. I might even paint all the other aspects that I've talked about this figure, make a couple changes, and eventually I even plan on doing a video about it. But with that said, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.